Good morning from our global headquarters in New York. I'm Manus Crenny alongside Danny Berger. Welcome to Bloomberg Brief. Let's set your agenda.
The debate concludes. Harris leaves Trump playing defense with just 55 days until the election. Inflation in focus for the Fed. Can today's CPI shift the betting for bigger rate cuts? And a new proposal from Israel, safe passage for the leader of Hamas, is being offered in order to bring the hostages home. Good morning, Manus.
Danny, good morning. Looks like Wall Street wasn't convinced by the debate. They're debating the CPI today and what that might mean for rates. Yesterday was a day of torture for the banks. The KBW down by 1.8%. And tech gave us a little bit of a floor. We'll talk more about the banks in a short while. How much of a canary in the coal mine is the Ali CFO? Struggling borrowers. Goldman Sachs say the odds of an outright bear market are slim. That's down by 20%. There's the KBW on the close yesterday. Bonds, look, we've been at these 2022 lows for a couple of days. I think what's interesting in the bond market, as we prepare for $39 billion worth of 10-year paper today, is the total number of rate cuts priced in by the market moved by 8 basis points yesterday, higher to 240 basis points. Dollar is on the move this morning. This is the yen. Yen moving a little bit more aggressively. We've got Bank of Japan official Nagawa talking about real rates being extremely low. So this is the dollar down and the yen is bid. Danny?
For these markets, it's still too many unanswered questions. Yeah. The most recent job data did little to tell us whether the Fed would go 25 or 50. Can CPI do that? I think there's some doubt. And then for the debate, most people would agree that Harris had a stronger night, but it still doesn't resolve us one way or the other who the clear winner will be. It is still an extremely tight race.
And I think even if you look at the betting odds, what have we got? We've got a bump for Harris at 51.8% to Trump 46.9%. So again, a significant shift higher in the betting markets. And it's got to be emphasized on this. The betting market's up 4.5 percentage points for Harris. But maybe it was Taylor Swift that maybe sort of nudged. She came out and supported
Well, you think
Harris.
Swift overshadowed the debate?
Listen, you know what? It's another. She's got what, 95 million people on Twitter, 270 million people on Instagram. That's a hefty number.
To be fair, when George Clooney had that op-ed about Biden, you and I were like, okay, well, when is Taylor Swift going to weigh in? So she finally did. But
drum roll.
Exactly. But look, there are still a lot of undecided voters, or at least voters who want to know more about Harris. 30% in the latest polling. And in their first debate, Vice President Harris and former President Trump, they did clash over their economic plans. Here was some of the heated exchanges that they had.
Wait a minute. I'm talking now. If you don't mind, please. Does that sound familiar? We have inflation like very few people have ever seen before, probably the worst in our nation's history.
His plan is to do what he has done before, which is to provide a tax cut for billionaires and big corporations. People start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom.
She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. I showed up for a speech. I said, I think it's going to be big.
To attack our nation's capital, the freedom to make decisions about one's own body should not be made by the government.
Well, there she goes again. It's a lie. I'm not signing a ban, and there's no reason to sign a ban because we've gotten what everybody wanted.
Under Donald Trump's presidency, he ended up selling American chips to China to help them.
We hardly make chips anymore. She hates Israel. At the same time, in her own way, she hates the Arab population.
That's absolutely not true. He's trying to, again, divide and distract from the reality.
Let's discuss that debate. Bloomberg's Vonnie Quinn has been here burning the night oil. Vonnie, good to see you. This is a culmination, a pivotal moment. I think a lot of people expected Harris. It was Harris's to win in terms of the narrative. Did we learn anything on policy that can really swing somewhere in the swing states?
I think the short answer to that is no, if you have been following the events up to now. And if you haven't been, and those were the voters, obviously, that these candidates were trying to reach, then perhaps you did learn something. Perhaps you learned a little something, but nothing that we didn't know already, right? So we knew about the economic policies, the help for homeowners, the child tax credit. We knew about the potential tariffs that Donald Trump was going to put on corporations in abroad and on China, and 100% tariffs on countries that might move away from the dollar. So there was nothing hugely new in terms of economic policies or other policies. However, we did learn a lot more about how Kamala Harris Harris is able to take on people like Donald Trump, who has led the United States in the past. Don't forget, it was her first meeting with him and her first presidential debate. It was his 7th presidential debate. And I just want to give you some of the Wall Street analysis. Immediately afterwards, Terry Haynes of Pangea saying Harris was the clear debate winner. He now puts her odds of winning at 60%. Isaac Boltanski of BTIG says Harris won the night. Paul Donovan, though, of UBS, always with slightly oblique take, he said it was a debate of social media memes more than in-depth policy analysis. And I think that's why perhaps both campaigns are quite happy to have another debate, Donald Trump into the spin room afterwards, and replying to what the campaign for Harris put out, that she would be quite happy to do a second debate. He said he would too.
Yeah, very rare for the candidate himself to go out into a spin room.
Depending on the candidate these days,
True,
right? Yeah.
yes. I guess all norms are being broken. I mean,
he's going to be on again literally at 7 a.m. He's going to do an interview with Fox,
can you talk about that, the plans post the debate? Because I know Harris is going to some swing states. He's going to Fox. What do we make of all this?
First of all, it's September 11th, so they will be making stops to do with memorializing September 11th, so that's happening. But, you know, they are fitting in a whole lot of other things as well. Not so much the vice president, because they're going back to Pennsylvania to one of the sites. They will also be going to Washington, D.C. to another of the sites at the Pentagon. The president is going to be on Lower Wall Street early in the morning after he does his interview with Fox News. That's the former president, Donald Trump. But yes, he obviously likes talking, and there are 55 days left, and the more he can get out there and be in front of people. But, you know, the interesting thing, Danny Manis, is that it didn't feel like he was addressing voters that weren't already swayed to him. Now, I think, as Terry Haynes was saying, the idea is that if he can get 100% of MAGA voters out, then perhaps he can overwhelm the Harris vote, whereas she does actually need to reach some new voters as well.
And this is where it comes down to in Pennsylvania, which is around Pittsburgh and around the urban areas, which is getting that vote out. That's the critical issue. New York Times said that she needled Trump, especially around the people that turn out for his events. In terms of Pennsylvania, I mean, he went straight for the cut in terms of fracking and her flip-flopping on policy, didn't he?
He did. They were both actually asked to explain some of their flip-flopping ways of the past, and they both did a pretty good job of explaining, you know, how they're different candidates now and so on and so forth. But the Pennsylvania point that you make is an interesting one, because at one point they were talking about Ukraine, and Kamala Harris said that if Donald Trump had been in charge of the whole thing, that Vladimir Putin would be sitting in Kyiv. And she called out to Polish Americans in Pennsylvania, you know, there's several thousand of them that are in Pennsylvania, and said, you know, how explain that to your people. And so clearly there is an emphasis on very particular demographics in, you know, every possible swing state.
Yeah, I mean, it being in Philly itself is even some Pennsylvania pandering, if you will. Yeah. Bonnie, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Bonnie Quinn there. Now, Lindsay Newman, a geopolitical risk expert and columnist for GZero Media, weighing in on the debate, writing, "We did not see the disciplined Trump of June 27th. He was reactive to Harris. Harris did not offer much deeper insights on her policy, but she was able to communicate a broader candidacy vision of turning the page and moving forward." Lindsay, I'm pleased to say, joins us now. Lindsay, in the latest New York Times Siena poll, 28% responded that they want to learn more about Harris. Did she teach them? Did she succeed in defining herself in this debate?
Thanks, Danny, for having me on. Yeah, last night was she had a tough job to do. The stakes were higher for her. I think the plan for Donald Trump was simple. It was to convey that if you don't like how your pocketbook feels, if inflation rates are too high for you, if interest rates are keeping you from buying property, you're going to get more of the same under Harris than you had with Biden. I think he did not deliver that message. I think he got sidetracked, and we did not see, as I said in that quote, the disciplined Donald Trump that we saw from the 27th June. I think we saw a true social Trump. For Harris, as I said at the start, the task was tougher for her. She needed to speak to those voters and widen the Democratic umbrella beyond what Biden has thus far been able to do. As we've heard this morning, the policy discussion was light. We did not learn more. She had a couple of points that she dug in on around this $50,000 tax credit for small businesses. wages, 3 million additional homes. But she's still talking about this vision of turning the page, moving forward, and an opportunity economy without necessarily digging in. And that's more of a generic Democratic candidate. And the question then becomes, how do undecided voters tuning in last night feel about this? Does this change their mind for November?
You said that she had a near flawless August, and when you look at that performance last night, it was an unsure footing at the start. It did gain momentum, but when it comes to some of the biggest policies where she has changed, and he has flip-flopped as well, what did you make of the discourse around the key issue in Pennsylvania, which is around fracking and around their industry?
What I would say around this is, first of all, I would point out that we had a remarkable moment at the start of this debate, which is that we had Vice President Kamala Harris go up to former President Donald Trump and shake his hand and introduce herself, right? So Vonnie said at the start, they had never met before. So from moment one, Harris projected control, and that was the through line of the night, that she sort of had an agenda, which was to define her candidacy, to paint a picture of what a second Trump administration would be, a Trump without guardrails, and to try to take the sting out, whatever he was going to throw at her last night. And she did that effectively. So she executed on that plan. When it comes to this issue of fracking and flip-flopping, perceived flip-flopping, I think it's an effective tactic that she's taken, which is to hone in on the fact that her vision, whatever that is, has not changed. She has consistently, she said, held the same vision, particularly on fracking. Her position since 2020 hasn't changed. And I would just say that flip-flopping is an issue that has come up quite a lot over many presidential campaigns. But I think we're at a bigger, I think the context is much bigger than that for this election. And voters know that you're making a choice between two very different candidates. And I don't know that this issue of flip-flopping is actually that effective a point.
Lindsay, I actually thought the fracking part of the energy discussion wasn't the most interesting. This is what I thought was really interesting from Harris. She said this: we have got to invest in diverse sources of energy. We have to reduce our reliance on foreign oil. We have had the largest increase in domestic oil production in history under the Biden-Harris administration, which is true, Lindsay, but it's something that Democrats have shied away from talking about because it goes against some of the renewable energy policy they want. What do you make of Kamala Harris really owning this fact that they have been good for the energy sector for the past 4 years?
I agree with you, Jenny. I mean, there were a couple moments last night, and that was one of them, when she was purposely, intentionally trying to expand this umbrella because she knows that she needs to do it. And that, as you say, was one of them. This point, she was quite hawkish on national security, saying, as Vonnie said just earlier, painting these pictures about Putin would have been in Kyiv, but for the global coalition that she contributed to building. And that's what that was after.
In terms of the narrative from Harris, she said on a global stage, world leaders say you are a disgrace. And of course, they're back and forth in terms of the war, the hot war that we have in Ukraine, Russia, and the Israel-Hamas situation. To that extent, do you think that the voters that they were trying to convince to come on board with them, to what extent does foreign policy or did foreign policy or does that kind of line work?
Yeah, Menace, I have my latest column for GZero actually talks about how these foreign policy tests do lurk within this election, that there's plenty on the domestic policy agenda for the next president. But we know, if we've learned anything over the last 4 years, dormant foreign policy tests are never dormant for long. And so we didn't really learn that much in terms of what the new approach is going to be under a potential Harris presidency on Israel. I think that was an area, despite the headlines that we've heard today about Israel offering a new potential new proposal, we didn't get much further information around Israel. On Russia, I thought, again, that was quite an interesting back and forth between Harris and Trump. I thought Harris came out the stronger on that and was seen very effective, particularly in terms of building that story around Putin and Kyiv. But foreign policy is not necessarily going to be changing minds and changing voters' decisions in November. And I think we're getting closer to where this points around momentum really matter. Points around Taylor Swift throwing her hat into the race cannot be discounted because the race is a dead heat. Betting markets, as you said, have seemed to interpret that Harris won last night and have given her a bit of an edge. But we know this is going to come down to a race of tens of thousands of voters across several of those swing states, Pennsylvania being the one that most eyes were on last night.
It is indeed. And as Trump said to her, she hates Israel. She wouldn't meet Netanyahu. All my career and my life I've supported. So it's really trying to clear the divide there. Lindsay, thank you very much for your interpretation of last night's historic event. Geopolitical risk expert and columnist at GZero Media. We have other stories that are trending on the Bloomberg terminal, believe it or not, this morning. In the deals front, UniCredit has built a 9% stake in Commerzbank. This makes UniCredit the second largest stakeholder in the German lender. The move raises the possibility of a takeover that could reshape Europe's banking landscape.
Spain breaks ranks with the EU on Chinese EV tariffs. Present Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez says the bloc should re-examine plans to impose additional tariffs. He is currently traveling in China and has met with President Xi Jinping.
And Taylor Swift has endorsed Kamala Harris. She made the announcement minutes after the debate wrapped up. Those social media posts featuring her cat, Benjamin Button. She says she is voting for Harris because she fights for rights and causes. I believe we need a warrior to champion them.
Sorry, I'm only laughing at the Benjamin Button name, not her endorsing Harris. Obviously, it's politically important, but the name Benjamin Button
is brilliant.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good. Okay, coming up, it's CPI day. We'll preview the data point that markets are watching out for next on your Bloomberg Brief.
It is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Manish Cranny alongside Danny Berger in New York. It is CPI day. Joining us now to break down exactly what we can expect is Bloomberg's Jill Deese. Jill, we're looking for a well-behaved CPI, and this would be the fourth month in a row, pretty much in line with what the Fed needs to see. Talk us through what we expect.
Yeah, that's right, Manis. So look, at this point, what we're really expecting here is both in that overall headline gauge as well as the core gauge. That's the one that excludes volatile food and energy costs. You're looking at maybe a 0.2% rise in August from the month before. That would be kind of in line there with sort of that slowdown in inflation that we've really been seeing. I think the big expectation here, Manis, is that maybe rental costs, housing is the biggest component of the CPI basket here. So maybe that's cooling down a little bit more. And yes, Manis, that would ultimately give more room for the Fed to obviously really reinforce that cut that we're all expecting next week by 25 basis points. Will there be enough in there that shows something that they need to be a little bit more worried about, that they need to be a bigger cut? We'll have to see, but ultimately it does seem like we're maybe on pace there.
It does feel, though, that going into this meeting, sure, the consensus is for 25 basis points, but it's not necessarily a clear and decided outcome yet. Jill, could today's data change any of that?
That's right, Danny. I mean, maybe, if you've got some additional downside surprises there, you see something that really worries the Fed there. But I'd also point out that it's really, I think, more of the labor market that's become more of that front and center concern for the Fed at this point versus inflation. I mean, we've been seeing some of those downward trends in inflation. So barring any massive surprises here, I'm not sure that it really moves the needle enough to at least change the market expectation from right now, which seems to be pretty broad consensus that it's 25 basis points. But again, yes, I mean, you do have to kind of reserve room there for any kind of massive surprises that actually shift things a little bit further, put more pressure on the Fed.
All right, that data coming in 8:30 a.m. U.S. time. Jill, thank you so much. That's Bloomberg's Jill Deese. Okay, a quick check on your banking stocks in the pre-market, because, Manis, they had a rough day yesterday. It was a Barclays conference that's pretty much bad for everyone. Goldman, Ali, and JP Morgan and Morgan Stanley, all of them issuing warnings at the conference. Basically, this idea the Goldilocks era of healthy borrowers and fatter margin loans is over.
Yeah, I mean, I like what John Arthur says. It was a jarring split screen between what they were saying at the conference and then the Fed actually reducing your capital needs. And Daniel Pinto said, look, you're way over your skis in terms of what we're going to do for net interest income. But, it's almost as if the bankers were saying one thing about interest, but Ali Financial were saying something about the consumer. We're dealing with a cohort of borrowers who are struggling with the cost of living. And that's the reality when it comes to buying a car and doing normal things.
As KBW says, though, is it a canary in a coal mine, or is it just a problem that they have on their own? Okay, coming up, we're going to walk you through some of the top news of this morning on your front pages. It's Bloomberg Brief. Danny Berger alongside Manus Cranny in New York. Let's look at some front pages this morning. Just to be clear, basically every single front page has the debate up center on the A, top of the fold. But elsewhere, the Washington Post also has this. They're reporting that a bridge fire in California's Angeles National Forest had taken over 34,000 acres in just a matter of hours. As of the latest update from officials, 0% of the blaze has been contained.
And the Journal leads with reports that U.S. household incomes rose last year for the first time since COVID-19 pandemic began. That's the latest U.S. Census Bureau data reflecting easing inflation pressures and a strong job market.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because coming into this data, Paul Donovan this morning writing that one of the focuses for the CPI report needs to be consumers' ability to spend and their basically spending power, because wages have held up strong. I think that Journal story really emphasizes it, that wages are okay. So if things come down like owner's equivalent rent, it doesn't matter for consumers. But if other parts come down, it is a consumer that maybe has more ability to spend.
And just on the owner's equivalent rent, it is the one thing that is like the rub with Paul Donovan. It's the rent. It's the rent that nobody pays. But again, this goes back to what Paul had been saying, which is about the timeline between losing your job and a negative feedback loop on consumption. We already know U.S. consumers are tapping their home loans or their home equity. We know that credit is piling up here. We're going to talk about the CPI in just a moment.
From our global headquarters in New York, welcome to Bloomberg Brief. I'm Danny Berger alongside Manus Cranny. Let's set your agenda.
The debate concludes. Harris leaves Trump playing defense with just 55 days to run to the election. Inflation in focus for the Fed. Can today's CPI shift the betting for bigger rate cuts? And a new proposal from Israel. Safe passage for the leader of Hamas is offered to bring the hostages home. Danny, good morning. These markets are focused on CPI rather than the debate, really.
I have to say, though, two notes in my inbox, one from Elias Haddad of BH, the other one from Andy Brenner of Nat Alliance, both saying what we're witnessing in markets is the opposite of the post-June Trump trade debate. Now, we can debate about whether that's actually what's happening in markets this morning. But what is happening is we are breaking those 2 consecutive days of gains in the S&P 500. The first time we've had that in a month. We're down by about 0.4%. We do have notes coming in from UBS saying that we could see a 15% downside just from technical factors, even just a hint of weaker data. The rally continues in bonds, down by 3.5 basis points, 3.6%, trading at the lowest since June 2023. 2-year yields the lowest since 2022. Part of that was weaker oil yesterday, of Brent going to $70 a barrel. Then you have dollar versus the yen. It is weakening this morning, weaker by 0.75%. One BOJ member coming out to say that we will indeed hike should the environment be conducive to it, Manus.
Yeah, well, as you say, the debate is whether the short end of the curve is really lurching lower at a 2022 low on the back of the risk that the Fed could go for a jumbo cut. And if you get CPI data today, I don't know that the CPI data today has the capacity to take us over the line for a 50 basis point cut. It depends whose research you actually read.
Well, just hearing from Fed officials themselves, they have talked about this idea that there is no rush, that there's no rush and we don't need a cut in a jumbo way because the economy is still strong. So will weaker CPI, will lower inflation give them that rush? It's hard to argue that it would, because in their minds, 50 is reserved for some sort of economic debacle, something that forces them to go.
Well, we know that the majority of the Fed seem to want to go in this methodic pace. The question is whether that gap is widening with Powell. But just on the debate, on the betting markets alone, Harris got a nice bump, up 4.5%, Trump down 4%. This is a compilation of various betting markets out there. So the takeaway is that she did on Trump, and that she did push him slightly onto the back foot.
Well, we talk so much that this debate needs to be Harris defining herself, because there are many people out there, 30% in the New York Times Siena poll, who said they want to know about her. Isaac Boltansky, a BTI Ajij, saying those who were just being introduced to Harris would not struggle to envision her beside the Resolute desk, in the West Wing. So maybe it wasn't the clearest on policy, but maybe did enough to define herself.
And I think UBS were here yesterday. They said normally you're talking to about 10% voters out there that haven't decided. That's come down to somewhere around 5%, a couple of 100,000 people who are going to define and decide perhaps the outcome of this election. It is the first debate, as Danny and I have been saying, between Vice President Harris and the former President Donald Trump. They clashed over economic plans, and it was pretty heated exchanges.
Wait a minute. I'm talking now. If you don't mind, please. Does that sound familiar? We have inflation like very few people have ever seen before, probably the worst in our nation's history.
His plan is to do what he has done before, which is to provide a tax cut for billionaires and big corporations. People start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom.
She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. I showed up for a speech. I said, I think it's going to be big.
To attack our nation's capital, the freedom to make decisions about one's own body should not be made by the government.
Well, there she goes again. It's a lie. I'm not signing a ban, and there's no reason to sign a ban, because we've gotten what everybody wanted.
Under Donald Trump's presidency, he ended up selling American chips to China to help them.
We hardly make chips anymore. She hates Israel. At the same time, in her own way, she hates the Arab population.
That's absolutely not true. He's trying to, again, divide and distract from the reality.
Joining us for more on the debate is Bloomberg's Vonnie Quinn, who's been up all night. Vonnie, you didn't only just watch the debate, but you've been also monitoring the campaign responses to the debate. What sort of things are we hearing?
Well, both sides are claiming a win, obviously. I guess that's to be, expected. However, it does seem that the consensus, perhaps on Wall Street even, as you were pointing out, Danny, with some of the ways the asset classes are moving, is that Kamala Harris did win this debate. But what constitutes a win, right? It's definitely something different for Harris than it would be for Donald Trump. Donald Trump wants to motivate his MAGA base. They all want to try to reach out to undecided voters. But she, as you said, also needed to introduce herself to more people and introduce herself in a different way. This is the first time she's been on a stage like this in a presidential debate. Donald Trump has been in that situation 6 previous times. Now, she's been vice president, of course, and she's had various different events since Joe Biden took himself off the ticket. But this has been the first time she's really been able to get out there and go head-to-head with him. And I have to say, it's been impeccable timing for the Democrats, because not even 10 minutes after the debate was the Taylor Swift endorsement.
Yeah, it came out. Danny's a fan of the name of the cat, Benjamin Button.
But does it imply the cat's getting younger? I don't know.
turn back time. We could all do with that. In terms of commanding performance, Lindsay Newman was with us a little bit earlier, and she said, Harris took command of this debate. She walked on the stage, she shook hands. They didn't shake hands, I think, at the end. But the hot button issues, you listened to it the whole way through. Where do you think the most contentious issue was? Was it on abortion?
I think definitely one of them, yeah, for sure. Pocketbook issues, inflation, the economy, absolutely reproductive rights, and the idea that, there had to be a fact check on Donald Trump, because he actually suggested that in some areas of the country, a baby could be put to death after being born. And the ABC News moderators had to say, look, it is illegal in every state to kill a born baby. So there were definitely times like that. But you mentioned her commanding performance. She also reached out to, the so-called begrudging Trump voters, didn't she? She said, look, come along, there's room for you under my tent. She mentioned to him that she had 200 former Republican and current Republicans on her side, including former Vice President Dick Cheney, for example, and former President Bush.
And in terms of the next steps, we've got Trump on TV. I think you said in, what time? It's 5:30. I thought it was 6:30. in an hour and a half's time. Again, this is sort of slightly unprecedented. We talked about this, went into the spin room immediately afterwards. So what does today hold in terms of the narrative?
Well, today is going to be a little bit more somber, because it is September 11th. It is the anniversary of that awful day. And there will be visits to several of the sites where attacks took place. Vice President, President currently are going to be going to all of 3 sites, and the former president will be on Wall Street.
Vonnie, thanks a minute. Vonnie Quinn, wrapping up the debate, the top lines there. We're counting down to the CPI for August. A cooler print is what we expect from this set of data. Jill Decis is with us. Jill, good to have you with us. The debate that we're going to have is plus 0.2% on the core number. And then the debate becomes, is this series of inflation prints enough to give us a 50 basis point cut, isn't it?
Yes, that's certainly the debate, Manus. I think at this point, that's what analysts are broadly expecting, this idea that you'd see a 0.2% rise month on month there. I think market consensus at this point is that this is essentially enough maybe to keep things in line with where everybody's looking right now, which is a 25 basis point cut next week once the Fed meets. That seems to be what they're on track for. But I think what we have to look at there is whether there's any additional downside surprises in the data that suggest that maybe the economy's sort of softening even more rapidly than we're suggesting, that might be enough to trigger that 50 basis point cut. But I think, the one thing that we have to keep in mind here, Manus, is that idea of that 50 basis point cut. I mean, that's really that jumbo size cut that maybe, the worry there is whether that triggers any kind of, additional, fear or, consternation among the Fed. That's a big move. There's got to be a lot of data there to really, really support something that feels that sizable.
Jill, okay, so just lay out what the economic data has been coming into this, because we had a jobs report, you've had this drip feed, and it feels like the market is reacting to every single little piece of data. Just where do we stand on the picture and the flow we've gotten?
Yeah, Danny, well, at this point, I'd say, first of all, even though the jobs report from August was maybe a bit inconclusive there, it still, I think, is kind of suggestive of the fact that, we're starting to see, in terms of the Fed's mandate here, the focus has really shifted over the past couple of months, more so from inflation, more toward, the labor market, jobs, how much cooling we're actually seeing. And so I think, despite the fact that obviously we're all paying attention to what the CPI report is going to say, looking for clues on what that actually tells us about what the Fed may be thinking as they head into next week, it's really, I think, that the many, Fed officials themselves have really, kind of had this drumbeat over the last several weeks about how important that labor market data is. So I think that's maybe, look, markets are going to look for literally any little, nugget of information that they're getting out of any of these data reports to tell us what the Fed's actually thinking. But at the same time, I think at this point, probably it's going to be anything that's telling us about jobs or labor market data that's going to be maybe just that teeny bit more informative than even, something as substantial as a CPI report that we're getting soon. Teeny
bits of information and nuances can certainly shift the dial in this rates market. Jill, thank you very much. Jill Decis, counting us down to CPI. Well, it's all about the Fed's next move. Lydia Boussour, senior economist at EY, writes this. Fed Chair Powell distanced himself from his colleagues' gradualism during the Jackson Hole address. Most Fed policymakers continue to favor a methodical easing of monetary policy. She joins us now around the desk. Lydia, good to see you. So he's distanced himself from the crowd, from that methodical process, a little bit more dovish, one could say. Can this CPI help bring the rest of the Fed along behind him today? Is that how important this CPI print is?
I think the CPI report this morning will be important to watch, but I don't think that's the critical factor that will shape the Fed's view and the Fed's decision next week. I think, Fed Chair Powell was a little bit more dovish at Jackson Hole. We also heard last week from Governor Waller, who seemed to be open also to larger rate cuts. But in our view, most of the policymakers on the FOMC are still favoring that gradual approach. And that's why we think the consensus will land on that 25 basis point rate cut.
And you draw the distinction between what they will do, which is what you're talking about now, and what they should do. You make the argument, as many people do, that they are behind, and 50 basis points makes more sense. What is the risk if we don't get a totality of cuts of something that looks like 100 to 125 basis points of cuts in this year?
Yeah, so when we look at the economic picture today, we're not looking at a recessionary environment. We've seen some signs of softness. in the economy. The labor market has moved from an overheated labor market to a labor market that has come back into balance. And now we're seeing some signs that perhaps we're moving into a situation where we're seeing some signs of imbalance. We're still far off from that neutral policy stance. We still have, about 200 to 250 basis points of rate cuts to get there. So there is still some distance and some ways to get there. At the same time, we do look at an economy that is still carrying some momentum. We still have moderate growth in the economy. We have the GDP tracker right now at around 2% in the third quarter of the year. So we don't have a recession in our baseline, but we do expect to see below trend growth because that restrictive policy will continue to exert downward pressure on economic activity.
At that Barclays conference yesterday, there was some real juice from the alley financial in terms of the delinquencies and the pressure that's being felt in the real consumer. But you say wages remain strong, and that's the key.
Well, when we look at wage growth on the labor market today, I don't think the labor market is still putting upward pressure on wage growth. And we've seen wage growth receding quite a bit. We're looking today at a labor market that's no longer putting upward pressure on wages. And when we look at the broader consumer picture, what we're looking at is some moderation in consumer spending. But I think it's also important to stress that there is that bifurcation between consumers that are still able to spend and lower income households that are feeling the pinch from those higher interest rates and from still high inflation as well. So, this overall picture is going to lead to that moderation in consumer spending and below trend growth heading into 2025.
I have to say, the market is incredibly sanguine about the ability for inflation to come back down to 2%. Break-evens are just hovering around that level. I wonder if markets have gotten too far in expectations that we do get back to 2%. There's not some sort of structural forces that keep inflation higher.
When we look at the inflation picture today, we've been in the camp that there are a lot of disinflationary forces that are at play. And when we are going to get the data this morning, I think they're going to show that we continue and we remain on that disinflation track. We talked about the labor market. There's no longer that inflationary pressure in the labor market. We've seen pricing power decreasing from this very post-pandemic elevated level. We're also seeing more disinflation in the pipeline on the housing front as well. All of these factors are going to continue to bring down inflation.
Before we let you go, differentiate for us between normalization and the risk of a real recession, because that is what the Fed is grappling with, isn't it?
Yeah, so when you look at this easing cycle, I think it's very important to make that distinction. The Fed here is really heading towards a recalibration of monetary policy. We're not looking at recessionary conditions today in the US economy. And so the Fed is really opting for that gradual recalibration of monetary policy, but they're also willing to lean against the labor market risk. And that's very important. So if we see more weakening in the labor market, I think they'll be ready to do more if needed.
So it sounds like maybe we can kind of ignore today's report, at least in terms of how the Fed reacts to it. Lydia, appreciate your time this morning. You're looking at me like, of course it's important, Danny. Lydia Boussour, EY Senior Economist. This is Bloomberg. It's Bloomberg Brief. I'm Danny Berger, alongside Manus Cranny in New York. Israel is proposing giving the leader of Hamas safe passage out of Gaza in exchange for freeing its hostages and giving up control of the Strip. That, according to a senior official. Joining us now for more on the latest ceasefire efforts is Bloomberg's Bobby Ghosh. Bobby, what do you make of the proposal?
Well, it's interesting that the proposal is being made and being made public. What we heard from Gal Hirsch, the chief negotiator from the Israeli side in these talks towards that are trying to get to a ceasefire, is that this proposal was made a couple of days ago, 3 days ago now. Yahya Sinwar and his family and anyone who wants to go with him can leave in exchange for the hostages. There are other caveats attached, which is that Hamas has to agree to lay down its arms and cede control of Gaza. The fact that it's being made public is very interesting. It comes at a time when the Netanyahu administration is under enormous pressure, lots of criticism, particularly from families of the hostages, saying that he Prime Minister Netanyahu is the biggest obstacle towards a ceasefire, that he's not doing enough to get their loved ones away from Hamas. So this is him saying, we've made the ultimate deal. We've said you can leave in exchange. And this is not just anybody, and this is not just the leader of Hamas. This is the man identified as the mastermind of October 7th, the terrorist attack. It would be like President Bush announcing a year after 9/11 that bin Laden could leave his cave and go back, go home, as long as the Taliban and Al Qaeda gave up. The announcement, the optics of it are significant, but I'm skeptical about the actual impact.
Your skepticism is perhaps played out in Hirsch's next statement, which is, in parallel, I'm working on Plan B, C, and D. Yeah. What does that say to you about the Israelis' assumption of this offer?
I think the assumption is that he won't take it. After all, remember, Yahya Sinwar is keenly aware that his immediate predecessor, who was on exile, was assassinated while on exile, and not just anywhere, in Tehran, where he had every expectation of being very, very safe. Israel has demonstrated over and over again that it is capable of reaching out around the world and taking revenge for atrocities against leaders of Hamas. And so Sinwar will be very aware of that. And he has given no indication that he wants to leave, or much less that he's willing to cede control of Gaza, or that he's willing to allow Hamas to lay down its arms. But he has to respond to the offer. Now that the offer has been made, some sort of a response is necessary.
And this, of course, is happening independent of what's happening with politics in the U.S. But still, we had a debate where foreign policy was talked about.
Yeah.
I mean, that's maybe being generous. It was talked about, and that's like kind of it.
Yeah.
You know, Trump saying that Harris hates Israel. Harris largely repeating what she said in the DNC about the Israeli conflict, telling Trump that, you know, he loves strong men, that Putin would be happy, essentially, would be sitting in Kyiv if Trump were to be president, and Trump saying that Viktor Orban likes me. Did we get anything real out of foreign policy about what 2025 might look like?
I didn't see anything that surprised me. It's a shibboleth of American politics that elections are not decided by foreign policy, that domestic issues matter the most. I got the sense yesterday from the few times that foreign policy came up that the candidates were simply ticking the boxes and reiterating themselves. No fresh ideas were put forth on that stage, and perhaps we really shouldn't have expected it.
Well, the one-liner from Harris was, in terms of world leaders, they see you as a disgrace, and of course his riposte was, you know, if he was there, he would have this war ended in 24 hours. Bobby, thank you very much. Bobby Ghosh on the very latest proposition from the Israeli side to Hamas. Coming up, the latest U.S. inflation read and a $39 billion bond auction for you. There's plenty ahead to trade on, right here on Bloomberg.
It's your brief, Danny Berger and Manish Cranny in New York. Let's take a look at what you can expect on this trading day. August CPI numbers, those come out at 8:30 a.m. That is the big piece of data. But don't forget, there's also an auction, $39 billion of 10-year notes. That will happen at 1 p.m. Eastern. Then meanwhile, in politics, President Biden, Vice President Harris at Ground Zero for the commemoration of the September 11th attacks. Meanwhile, Manis, it is just the hours away countdown to the CPI data.
It is indeed. And the question is that enough to actually move the dial on rate cuts? If you look at the rates market yesterday, Danny, we saw the overall projection for a total number of rate cuts between now and the end of next year rise by 8 basis points to 240 basis points. I think that was much more to do with the banking conference that we had. In other words, the canary in the coal mine from Ali, as opposed to what the investment bankers had to say, which was about NIMs and deal making from Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. I think the reality check was more what came out of Ali.
And the fact that you had oil move in the way it did. That also moved break-evens. WTI moving below $70 a barrel. Brent now trading around $70 a barrel. Odds for 50 basis point cut is 34%. I just think it's an interesting idea. Could CPI actually push them to do a jumbo rate cut? If it comes down enough to say the current rate of 5.5% isn't justified for where inflation is.
Well, look, we've heard all of these methodical, easy narrative from the Fed. Powell might be a little bit more on the dovish side. Will this CPI be enough to bring them all along with him? Surveillance is up next.